here at Albany Med. And we're really excited to be welcoming our second Grand Round Speaker of the Month. Just a quick reminder to please have yourself on mute throughout the conversation. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We are going to look at them at the end, but if at any point something comes to you and you want to just throw it in the chat right then, feel free to. And with that, I will pass it on to one of our wonderful first-year students in LMSA, Tyler.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
We can hear you. And good morning, everyone, and well, good afternoon, and thank you for coming, everybody. Like Aaron said, my name is Tyler. I'm an M1 in LMSA, and I'd like to introduce you all to our guest speaker today. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Brenda Pereda. Dr. Brenda Pereda from the University of New Mexico in the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Dr. Pereda is an assistant professor and assistant dean of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the University of New Mexico. She graduated from Michigan State College of Human Medicine Medical School in 2007 and completed her residency in obstetrics and gynecology at Detroit Medical Center. She also currently works at the Los Alamos Medical Center as an OBGYN. And thank you for joining us today, Dr. Pereda. And I would like to hand the floor over to you now.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for inviting me, particularly during a time when everyone's already 100% busy. But it's important to sort of mark events and recognize, who we represent as a population in the United States. I also want to really thank you for your time, because time is our most scarce and precious resource. And the fact that you're making time for such a very important topic really speaks volumes of who you are, who your mentors are, who your leaders are. And so you should be very happy and blessed to be able to be in an environment that uplifts this topic. Today, I'm going to talk about race, racism, and health. As we know, after May 26th, there's been a global consciousness around the need to really name what's happening in our country and how it impacts the health outcomes for the population that we serve. And so that's important for us to do. Of course, I'm going to start framing. As we know, we're living through a handful of pandemics. First, the pandemic of COVID. And for us in New Mexico, it's been disheartening to see, like a 2020 genocide, as our indigenous communities have been hit hard with lots of incredible deaths. And when a matriarch in an indigenous community dies, that's like a library dying, because a lot of the oral traditions are gone. And so it's very devastating for a state like ours. The second thing that we want to talk about is that we have been living through a pandemic, a 500-year pandemic of racism. That's also important to name. It's important to name in academic settings, because without us naming it, we can't then interrogate it, take it apart, resist it, and then re-put something together that we can reimagine for the way that we want to live and move forward. And so I wanted to say that this is just little stuff that talks about the racial data. For communities of color, COVID has been extra devastating. And if you come from a community and you're a provider, you get the double whammy, because you're watching your community sink. And that's been very disheartening. Again, in New Mexico, I've never imagined that I would be in the ICU and that all of the patients in there would be of Native origin. And so it's been incredibly disheartening and just hard. And I want to mention that although COVID is new, what predisposed this population to such horrible outcomes is that we have just a very fragile public health system. And so COVID didn't really break our system. It just revealed what was already broken. And then I think it's upon us to really think about how we move forward in medicine, in the academy, and training people, and how we ourselves practice medicine, so we can really uplift the community. And if I can remind ourselves, that's why we went into medicine. And I know you to be that. So I just wanted to use that as a framing. I'm very proud of this AAMC statement that really centers really the need for us to interrogate racism and police brutality and the impact of health. And so I just want to highlight a few things that I feel like they're doing very well. I think, for one, we must take the lead in educating ourselves and others to address these issues head on. The other thing is that we have to employ anti-racist and unconscious bias training, and we have to engage in interracial dialogue dispel the misrepresentations that dehumanize our Black community members and other marginalized groups. And then thirdly, we have to move from rhetoric to action so we can eliminate these health disparities. And so I feel like the AAMC is doing a lot more than a performative statement. They're really engaging, and they're really deeply rooted in how they're going to operationalize such statements. And I encourage all of us to do such a thing because the time is upon us. I always start my presentations with some acknowledgements. It's incredibly important to acknowledge the land that we're on, because we're doing this sort of in a space of virtual world. I'm going to invite you to go and do a little search on land acknowledgement and see who the people that steward the land are, who steward the land for you guys. These statements are not meant to be performative, but a mere reflection of really the past, the present, and the future. With regards to the past, we have to think about, you know, how indigenous communities have endured waves and waves of colonization, land theft from the 1970s till present. With regards to the present, it's important to really think about indigenous erasure in academic spaces. Since the beginning of time, we have not been able to go above 1% in representation of indigenous peoples. And I think with regards to future, it's upon us to really resist our inability to bring in indigenous colleagues into medicine. And it's not just medicine, it's really anything that's a higher education. And so I invite you to do that. I also want to mention that these land acknowledgements, they're sensitive. It's not like everyone can just go up and do them, that they require some consultation from Native people, that there's many ways of doing this. But without us centering Native and indigenous peoples, we're never going to have an opportunity to bring them in. And every single state in this country has indigenous populations. So I just wanted to lift that and name it for us. In really the people whose shoulders we stand on. Without our freedom fighters, many of us, particularly me, could not be on this phone call presenting to you because I'm first generation. And so it's important to really name that. I also like to name the people who radicalized me because of my mentors who were able to like take away my, you know, my shades or sort of my blinders. I'm able to really see the world for what it is and really live by my values. And so I thank them. I move on to the missing voices. And when I think about the missing voices, think about all the people who can't be on this call, who can't be in higher education, who can't advocate for communities. So it's important to be able to do that. One of the things we started doing in any sort of space is that we put a chair in the middle to represent who those missing voices may be. But when we think about missing voices, we also have to think about the deported, the departed, the incarcerated, and imagine all the human capital that we're losing because of unequitable policies that really incarcerate people unfairly. And then lastly, I never imagined in a million years that I would live in a country that caged children. And so those are also missing voices. I move on to time oppression because if we had all the time in the world, we can really think about these things in a robust way. But our society compresses us, and so our plates are already 100% full. And so it's important to really prioritize what you value most. And I'm pretty sure that what you value most is how to uplift your community. And then lastly, bending space is a notion where we have to be able to create the conditions to be able to have these conversations in an honest way. And so everything's not going to be safe space, but it's going to be courageous space because not all identities are going to be safe in one space. But I do want to make this space as safe as possible, and for you to put things into your chat and to engage in this as much as you can. I have some questions that you don't have to answer, but you can, if you want to put them in the chat, you can. But they're really questions for your own self-reflection. And so the first question is, how often do you have conversations about racism? The next question is, how often do you have conversations about racism with people of different races or of ethnicities from yourself? And then thirdly, how comfortable are you discussing racism in your role as a learner, faculty, or leader? And I think that's really where the rubber hits the road for us, right? If you're at the beginning of this journey, I can tell you that all of us are, because this hasn't been salient in our professional training, except that without the proficiencies to do things, to do this particular task, we really are doing a disservice to our learner and our patients. And we can see from all these racialized outcomes in COVID, that this is an important thing for us to think about, talk about, and then begin to undo. I would invite you to put these in the chat box, and these are your core values. And so for me, one of my core values is equity and justice. Like, if I can just live by those values, then I have fire in my belly and I can actually do all the work, and I have a lot of energy to really engage in work that is absolutely necessary in medicine in any academic space. And so go ahead and put that in the chat, and we're not going to call you out or anything, but I think that the more that we can put our core values at the center, it's easier to listen to a presentation like this, because I know what brought you into medicine. I know who you are as colleagues. And then when we center our core values, then we're really thinking about we're one people, and we're trying to figure out how to move forward in this pandemic of racism. And so go ahead and put it in the chat box. And then I want you to root this information that you're about to hear in those values, because it's easier to digest and to hear. Okay, I just want to sort of put this out here with regards to, underrepresented minority faculty make up 6% of all the faculty in the United States. And that clearly doesn't represent the population we serve. And so we have a lot of work to do. The good news is that there's like a little portal of permissiveness at this time in this country. And I feel like if we take advantage, we might be able to move the needle in this regard. And so I just wanted to put that out there for us to ponder, and you can put that in the back burner. I do want to talk a little bit about the barriers to health equity. These are important things to really think about. Kamara Jones, who's an amazing physician scholar, name these. I think that critical race scholar, these come to your mind, but in medicine, it takes someone like her to really lay them out for us. And so one of the barriers to health equity is our narrow focus on the individual. And by golly, we have been taught that the more that we build our CV, the better that we're going to perform in academic settings, except that the CV building items don't do a whole lot for our community sometimes. And so we might be better off if we have some sort of a collective efficacy where we put all our resources together and then begin to move and change that narrative. The other thing is our ahistorical stance. I can tell you that many people who come to New Mexico, they don't have any context for the history of New Mexico, the history of the people, the history of indigenous folks, the waves of colonization, genocide, any of those things. And so without having a historical perspective on the place where you work, we're bound to repeat the things over and over again and get ourselves in the same bind. And so I argue that we do a historical analysis of any place we practice so that you understand the traumas and how people show up. The other notion is this notion of the myth of meritocracy. And a lot of people think that if you just get to it and you pull yourself up by the bootstraps, then you're going to do it, except that could be true if people started in the same playing field. So if everyone started here at the same start, except that everyone knows, and everyone should know in this country, that that's just not how things are. They haven't been since the beginning of time. And so there are some people who are really coming out from here. There's some people that have maybe 2 or 3 blocks. And there's others who come from a historical legacy of privilege. And so these are the things that are really important. The other thing is this notion of the myth of the zero-sum game, where people are nervous they're really nervous to contribute because they say, well, why should I give up my piece of the pie? That's not a problem, except that it's all of our problems, right? And it is a myth, because if the tide rises, then all the boats rise. And one of how I like to think about this is that the more that we invest in our youths and our youth education, the better off we're going to be when we're elderly, because we're going to need them to take care of us. And so it's really important. Another barrier here is this limited orientation of the future. For indigenous communities, they actually plan around the impact that their decision-making will have 7 generations forward. And I think that you'll understand, because whenever I go to any professional space, no one ever asks me about my children or my parents or any of these legacies, right? Or my descendants. And it's important to be able to center them, because we're making decisions and we're trying to remake the world for them. And so it's important to have that future orientation. Then we have the myth of the American exceptionalism. And let me tell you, I'm a proud American, Mexican-American, Chicana. I'm proud of all those aspects, except that it is a myth, and we have shown to be very exceptional, but not in the right ways, particularly in our preparation for COVID. And then lastly, this ideology of white supremacy that continues to undermine a lot of our movements and our quest for equity. in our country. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. And so here are some of the reasons why we can't be ahistoric. This is a ground rounds for OB-GYN, and we have to really acknowledge that the field was built on the backs of slave Black women, unconsented. Many of the things that we do in OB come from that. And I've never actually seen such a thing in a robust textbook. I think things are starting to come. But in my training, this was just not something that we learned. And I think we do ourselves a disservice when we're ahistoric. I keep talking about colonization and land theft, but I live in New Mexico, so it's very present in my life. The second thing is here we have this Chinese Exclusion Act, but it didn't just happen to the Chinese. Many people come here. As a matter of fact, this country was built on the labor of immigrants, and then how we treat immigrants or how we displace them then is something that we have to really grapple with in our history. The women's suffrage, women were able to vote way later, and I kind of get that on historical frame. But then when I think about when Black men got their rights to vote, and then when Black women got their votes to vote, that wasn't until the 1960s. And to me, that's just yesterday, okay? And so that's something that we have to also grapple with. On a daily basis, we eat our food, and so we have to think about who picks our food and who doesn't have health insurance and who has to be frontline, because without being frontline, you don't get to eat. And so those are important consciousness points that we have to be aware of on a daily basis. As a mother of Afro-Latino children, I am this woman right here, right? Because I do want my kids to come home. I don't care if they're wearing a hoodie or not. And because I'm a reproductive health specialist, it's a reproductive health issue. It's a justice problem when you can't send your kids away to school and expect that they're going to come back in one piece. And that's a very disheartening thing for any mother, but particularly for women who are raising Black children. And then I put this here as something that's happening here because mass incarceration is a deep problem that's rooted in policies and procedures that really target Black and brown bodies. And we have to be more critical about how we think about laws and policies, even if we're medical people. And then lastly, like I said, I just didn't imagine living in a country that we would cage young children. And so this is part of our history and we have to embrace it. But when we're ahistoric, we don't understand really how the big pieces come together and how they impact the populations that we serve. And these are important things to think about. I want to talk briefly about race as a social and legal construct, because this race notion is splattered all over our medical literature, as if this was a proxy for pathology. And remember, it's a proxy for resource allocation and nothing more. And I won't bore you with the details, and I'm going to share the slides that you guys can read a little later. I also want to think a little bit about our anti-racism vocabulary sheet. And so we have to think about, let me see if I can get rid of this little thing here. I'm just trying to move these things because I can't really see. Okay, we'll just intersectionality. And so in medicine, it's kind of new. This idea of intersectionality was really put forward by a legal scholar, Kimberly Crenshaw. And it's a framework for understanding the ways that our multiple identities overlap and intersect. And it's really important to think about because this reinforces systems of subordination as well as resistance. And so these are important things to think about. This notion of oppression is also important to think about when we're thinking about moving forward and becoming anti-racist and how do we transform our institutions and our programs, right? And this merely means that there's just one social group who has privilege and one that's subordinated. And these are just mere definitions. This definition of white supremacy I like. I know that white supremacy is hard for people to hear, except that when we don't name it, then we don't even know how to take it apart. And so the only thing that this means is that historically people have thought of the dominant group as being better in many of the ways. But how I differentiate this is that white supremacy is a totalizing system comprised of racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, homophobia, transphobia, classism, ageism, etc. But what differentiates this is that this differentiates who has access to institutional power. That's the big difference here. It's not about people, it's about a system. And I think that's an easier concept to grasp. It's also sustained by colorblindness because sometime in the 60s or even 50s, we thought that if we were colorblind, that was a good moral argument. except that this is what got us in this predicament to begin with, because we need to be equitable to actually improve our community's health and not be colorblind. Everyone doesn't show up with the same issues. This is a good definition by Tim Wise. It's essentially the definition of racism. And in short, racism is a system of inequity based on race. And here's the full definition. And then lastly, it's insufficient for us to be not racist, right? Like that's just such a passive term. We actually have to be actively anti-racist. And many of us don't even know what that means. And that's not a critique on you as a person. It's a critique on us as a system, that we don't know how to make things active. We don't know how to resist racism, that these things have to actually be taught, and then we have to operationalize them, and then they become proficiencies. And so there's nothing shameful about this. This is just who we are as Americans, except that with us being actively anti-racist, we're not going to move the needle on racial inequities. Take a deep breath. I know this is heavy stuff. I've known it to be. I'm actually aging faster than I think I should because racial stress is really real. But I just want you to take a breath and really continue to engage in I think, important conversations like this. This is an artist from New Orleans, and this is very fitting because, we really have to uplift who have been the front line. It hasn't only been us. We are the privileged people who, with all the PPE, maybe not at the beginning, but now, but the frontline people who are just in society, like they didn't have the rigor that we did. And I think that's why we saw such a big spike in people of color, because that's who sustains our country. And so I love this artist, and here's his information. I don't have any stock, but I just love to uplift artists. Okay, so I think without thinking about the interventions, then it becomes a very gloomy presentation, because then what do we do about such a thing? So let me share things with you guys about what we could do. And so the first thing is why do we need an equity analysis to address health inequities or disparities? And let me share this with you. This is OB. So in the OB world, we know that we have the highest rates of maternal mortality of any developed country. And some people may say, well, it must be an access issue, or it must be that African Americans are not healthy, or, we begin to pathologize communities without thinking about the systems in which, and that creates these kinds of disparities. And so here's the health outcomes, which is a maternal mortality. And we're all very versed in what are social determinants of, but we're all very illiterate in looking upstream, thinking about the ideologies of what causes this. And when you look up, it's racism, right? And it's hard for people to really acknowledge that such a thing. But if I'm going to show you a few other images that you're going to say, yes, if we can't go upstream, we're not going to improve our health outcomes. And I can tell you that this is an exacerbating place to be. As an obstetrician who has had a maternal death, multiple, it changes you as a human. And so you get that fire in the belly to really think about, how do you move upstream to prevent this? This is someone's mother who's not going to be in their life forever. Like, that's a pretty bold statement, and it's a pretty harsh reality for children. Here's us, right? Here's every other developed country declining, and here's the United States, because we have a real problem with racism, and it centers, and the burden is on African-American women, followed by Native women. And here's another way to look at it. So here's Black women, and here's Native women. And so this is us in New Mexico, right? And this is the rest of the country. And so, again, the health of the mother and the child is vital for improving the health of the nation. And so it's important for us to really think about these things from a critical lens, and not just over here at the bottom of the river, pulling out the drowning babies. That's not a great place to be. Here's what I'm talking about. So here's us dealing with these maternal mortalities. It's exacerbating. But what we need to do is we need to move upstream. This is downstream. We need to think about, what causes this disease and injury, we need to think about what are the risk behaviors, but these are downstream. These are things that are happening because we have social inequities, because we have racism who are driving these things, okay? We have institutional inequities, right? And then that creates the living conditions that then give you this poor health. And so we don't want to be here. This is a place where we're going to burn out in 3 seconds. Okay, we got to work to move upstream. And some of us might say, well, I didn't sign up for that. I signed up to be a physician, except that that's not sufficient anymore. You can't just be a physician. You have to have the proficiencies to move upstream. That's how we're going to have healthy living for our patients, for us, and for our families. And so it's important for us to think about that with that framing. Here's some tools that I think are important to cultivate. this notion of structural competency is super important. There's so many things in the community that we need to make better use of, and how do we combine them and think of things in a structural way. We have to be upstreamists when we're thinking about how to improve outcomes for people. We also have to think about how do we become racially literate. I'm going to give you a definition of that, and that's what I've been working on literally for the last 10 years. So this has been sort of the bulk of my academic career.
Students in the graduating class that we agreed to use for AOA.
Okay, I'm going to continue. If people can mute themselves, that would be amazing. We also have to think about using critical race theory. It's not new, but it's new in medicine. We have to think about, getting some training in health equity praxis. And then how do we begin to go from this hierarchy to a more flattened mentorship as we're training people? Because people are arriving to our institution in very sophisticated ways around equity proficiencies. And the faculty are needing to actually get a little more skilled. And so if we flatten that dynamic out, I think that we'll be able to co-learn, and that'll be good. And then the next thing is movement building. The White Coats for Black Lives has done an amazing job really helping institutions move the needle. And then lastly, how do we get to a place where we can counter colorblindness? And I can talk a little bit about that later. Here's our upstream efficiency gap. So when we ask people what is their comfort, their confidence in addressing people's sort of upstream conditions, only 20% of physicians can do that. It means that there's a huge opportunity for us to learn how to be upstreamists. All right, and then as promised, I just wanted to show you this transdisciplinary thought model and what is critical race and how important it can serve us in medicine. So here's the issue. Here's into social justice. We have to really center racism. We have to use transdisciplinary ideas, like we have to use the sociologists, the community activism, psychologists, like they've been doing this for a long time. Historically in medicine, we haven't centered experiential knowledge. We've thought of this as anecdotal, except that there's nothing more robust and real than people's lived experience. And so we're really looking at how to do that so that we can actually, move through an analysis of critical race and really begin to move the needle that challenges the way racism implicitly and explicitly impacts social structures, practices, and discourse, particularly in the academy. Here's one of my favorite definitions of racial literacy, and that's because this is my mentor. But what is racial literacy? It's really your ability to code switch. And I think that people of color are exceptional at code switching, except that we all have to be good at code switching. And so it's a complex set of knowledge and skills that enables people to decode and interpret information, events, and lived experiences using race and racism as a concept of social power. It's a very powerful thing to be able to look at the environment and understand how racism impacts the presentation of patients and their outcome. And we're using it in that way. Let me share one other definition of racial literacy, and this is by one of my other mentors, Howard Stevenson. And he has spent 30 years of his life, literally, teaching Black boys how to encounter the police and walk away with a life, right? The fact that we have to do that in this country, it blows my mind, right? And the fact that someone has spent his whole career teaching people how to de-escalate from a police encounter is mind-blowing. But that also shows us how deeply rooted racism is in this country, particularly around Black men and boys. And so the idea here is that you're able to really bring a really heated encounter where it feels like a tsunami to a place where you can manage it, both of you can manage it, police and whoever is encountering the police, and then walk away feeling justice. The fact that someone has to spend 30 years is mind-blowing to me. But this is racial literacy, and it's really tapping into your body and recognizing that response that comes when you're like literally trying to get out of there in one piece, alive. And so that's Howard Stevenson, and we've collaborated with him to merge our definitions, but I still love this. And then we also have to be systems thinkers. We can't just be, everything that I talked about without us thinking about how to transform and reimagine the world that we live in. We won't be able to achieve racial or health equity. I'm going to just go ahead and read this, but I just want to give you the examples here. This is us, right? We do everything and sort of independently. This is us trying to build our CV items. except that if we can have interconnectedness, I think that we can move the needle a little bit better. We think that we're linear, but sometimes that's just not the way the process goes. It might be circular. This is us 100% academic medicine. There's just so much robust and amazing knowledge, but we're siloed, right? And so if we put it together, we can have an emergence of amazingness so that we can solve these complex issues that we face in medicine. Again, we do, it's not wholes. We do this independent analysis without synthesizing. And we do a lot of things in isolation, but what we really need to do is build relationships to be able to really be robust about how we change the narrative, but how we change our social practices in our country. I'm going to share this video. Bear with it. I think it's a fantastic video that really ties everything together. And then Aaron's going to help me. Do I need to stop sharing?
I think I can just
Okay, I stopped sharing. So he's going to share this beautiful video.
I'm not 100% positive it's going to play the audio, so
Okay,
let me know if the
let's
audio
see.
doesn't. Can you hear it?
No. Could you hear it?
I can hear it, but only me. So if
Okay.
that means it's not sharing the audio. Yeah, so I can just send the link in the chat.
Okay, yeah, send the link, and I think if people can open it independently, we have time. It's worthy of your time.
Just
Yes, open it up, and we'll spend like maybe 10 minutes, just kind of watching it independently.
I'll go ahead and share my screen playing it just so there's something on the screen.
Okay, super. Thank you. I'm gonna share my screen. Here's this one. Alrighty, so I'll wait because maybe other people have like 1 or 2 more minutes to finish. Give me the green light if we can continue.
I think we should be okay because I started my video a little bit later than
Okay.
folks.
All right, awesome. So I mean, thank you so much for enduring the video. I think the video kind of encapsulates, sort of puts it together, and she does such a beautiful job. So thank you for enduring the chat. Luckily, everyone is like very savvy with these computers, so it worked out. But where do we go from that, right? Like, what's next? Where could, I mean, like, here we are as learners, maybe faculty, maybe juniors, maybe seniors in leadership. But I think that one of the things that we have to think about is we got to start with the inner circle, and that's us, right? That's really practicing the self-awareness. We really have to identify where we are with our emotions. Where are we with our proximity to power, right? Where do we work, our context, the people, the history? Like, that's super important to really begin honing in on the awareness for social injustice. And then we have to reflect on our actions and the impact. It's not just enough that we do this work, then what do we do with it? And so then to continue to really adjust and move forward each time. But it really starts with us to notice and then to reflect on how we contribute, how we uphold things. And those are important things. And that's a good place to start. With regards to expanding our mental models, this is all of us right here. This is our traditional way, right? It's a top-down approach. Oops, it's very sensitive, this computer. It's a top-down approach. We see, we engage, we act. All of us do this, even if we're not in leadership, even if we're just learning. That's just how we were taught. Except that we really need to change our frameworks to be more equity-minded, and that's really go from the inside. We need to see, we need to engage, we need to act, right? And then we have to be able to have an ability to really take apart the complexity of the system in which we work. Then we have to really think about, are we listening? Are we building relationships? Are we making sense of the meaning of the things that we're trying to do here? And then we have to actually have a trajectory of what we want to do and how we want to do it. And I'm not saying we have to have the outcome. No, none of us know what the outcome is. We can just set a trajectory of where we want to be. And I think all of us want to be on a trajectory towards anti-racism. It's just, how do you do that part? And all of us are still learning. Let me give you an example of what you could do now. Like, you know, like today, it's like we can actually start that today, and that's thinking about choice points. These are decision-making opportunities that impact outcome. And so some choice points could be, if you're a student, where are you going to choose you spend your precious hours, right? Like, what organizations, what movement building? If you're going to order food for some event, order local, support farmers. If you're going to do sort of outreach, make sure that you're going to places that are forgotten and marginalized. Those are choice points that you could do today. That goes for everybody across the whole spectrum of the institution. The other thing is that we have to push to have resources to invest in equity and anti-racist practices. They don't just spontaneously combust and we just know how to do that. We got to bring in consultants to teach us. That's the measure of real commitment from an institution, when they put the money where the need is. We can't expect that to be overloading the people that usually come to the table. That's just not fair, and that causes minority tax. And so that's a measure of real equity, when an institution actually supports programs like that. And then wherever you are in each department, each rotation, you know, wherever you are, it's important to really think critically about, what is this? Let me move this out of the way. It's important to think critically about evaluating the policies and procedures where you are. And even if you're a student, it's important to look at those policies and procedures in your student handbook to make sure that they're equitable and that people have access to all the things that you do. Remember that you have direct control over your behavior. You have direct influence over people and communities. And then you have indirect influence on, you know, people that are sort of outside of your natural circle, who look up to you. And everyone here is already sort of a leader in some way. And so don't lose sight of that. This is one of my favorite feminist theorists, scholars, and she's calling on scholars to do work that matters, right? And also to become scholar activists. Like, we actually can't just be scholars and medical providers. We actually have to be advocates, and in all the spheres. And that we actually have to channel our energy to do the work for the betterment of society. And for us, because we're in medicine, that's really to advance health equity. She's from the Rio Grande in Texas, just an amazing scholar, I think really above her time. Unfortunately, she passed away in 2004. But that's someone that we should aspire to learn, or at least to learn from. I want to leave some time for questions. I want to thank you for your time again. I think that everything that I do in my academic practice is really for you guys, to uplift you and to make sure that you achieve your full self, get there with a lens of criticality. Muchas gracias. I'm going to stop here and we can open it up for questions. We have a few minutes.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Pereda. And yes, everyone feel free to just throw your questions in the chat. We'll go ahead and get started with just, if we could just get some simple definitions on things such as minority tax, code switching, and also if you could provide some examples of work that you do to promote OB health and equity in New Mexico.
Yes. So minority tax, imagine, let me give you my personal example. So I am one of two, I was one of one, one of like all of the underrepresented minority in my department for a long time. And then came, well, there was an elder Puerto Rican, but you know, he was like MFM and like part-time, but I was like the only one. And so you can imagine, if you have a framing for racial justice, it's not just the people in the OB department and the students, it's the whole institution is going to come to me for mentorship. So I probably have like more than like 80 mentees at a given time. And the mentorship that's required sometimes for other underrepresented in medicine, it's not about school mentorship. It's about how do you survive life and still get through medical school? Because a lot of us don't come from historical wealth, and we have to think about how we do that. And we are the social escalators for our family. And so it's not just us, it's like the intergenerational network of people that we have to take care of as learners, right? And then it gets more intense as you become faculty. So that's sort of the minority tax, right? And then the other example is that you get called to every single committee because there's not enough of you who have the framing. And so instead of publishing the way that institutions want, you're spending your time doing a lot of social work. Which in my opinion is more important than publishing. So that was one question. The next question was if I can give examples of what do I do in the OB world to improve health or outcomes. And a few things. So we lead a social justice journal club. So, and that's open to the whole institution. And so people come in and we'll do like a journal club. It's been a little hard on Zoom because it's not as fun as when you're at home and you can bring yummy snacks and you're out of the environment and there's good music and good conversation. It's just more like a little harder to get engaged. So we do that. Then I lead a health equity rotation for the OBs, where we really sit in a circle and we do name and place narrative, really think about intersections, really begin to hone in on concientización, like the critical awareness necessary for you to understand and how to act on social injustice. And then we do talk a lot about humility and how do we center our patients to make sure that we help them really achieve their best agency in the medical encounter. And so those are just some few examples. I'm also the co-founder of Centering Equity, Race, and Cultural Literacy and Family Planning. It's a national collaborative around reproductive health, really trying to dismantle racial injustice in family planning. And so those are like my three pots. And then I'm a dean, so I do a ton of stuff at the institution, but those are the three things that I'll share with you. I think was there one other question?
I'm not seeing are you seeing something else? I don't see any more, but I do have one more question.
Sure.
So I would be interested to hear, because you talked a lot about kind of your background and how it built into like your, radicalization and how it just kind of shifted your whole thinking. How do you think, what do you think is the most effective way to get people in the medical professions to like really genuinely be fired up about these kinds of things to where they do the work and they stick with it?
Yeah, that's a super good question. So I mean, a lot of us, like for example, I'm first generation, so you know, you go into medicine, but you don't really know what you're getting into. You just think it's a great career and you're so excited to do it, but you have no idea, really, like all that you have to give up in the world to do this, and to this day, right? Because I think that once you sign up for taking care of people, it's lifelong, and the education is lifelong. So I think that's one. But I think really what switched it for me was when I entered residency. So from undergrad all the way to medical school, because I'm first gen and I come from an underrepresented sort of disadvantaged background, I had to study really hard. And I'll be darned if anyone's gonna take me off my track to arrive at graduation. And so I really focused on getting good grades and just knowing everything that I possibly could. And so I was involved in many things, but sort of like peripherally, not really leading. But then when I got to Detroit, and then I really actually realized the definition of health disparity and how people get their 20 years of their life chopped off because of anti-Blackness. That just does something to you. And so I realized like you can't just be a clinician. You actually also have to work on the social mission of any environment. And then because Detroit has just so many robust ways, and like their cultural wealth is strong and it's underground. Then there's so many people doing amazing work that I just got some mentors, two Black women that mentored me. And then I came to New Mexico to do my fellowship in family planning. And then I was already like in a space where I can actually operationalize justice work. And so I did a master's program really around racial justice. It was really a master's in clinical research, but the second year you could do anything you want. And so I just took advantage of all the things possible. And I wanted a toolkit where I can then be a faculty that can actually then really interject and really think about how we operationalize justice in the academy. And so you do have to have fire in the belly. I think concientización is this notion where you're becoming more and more aware of inequities and how the world works. And this comes from Paulo Freire, who's a Brazilian educator in Brazil, working with the favelas. And it's not like I teach you a transference of education. No, is that you have to learn, you have to get the fire in the belly to understand why it's necessary to transform this world, right? Because without transforming this world, we're gonna die, right? Literally. And so so I learned a lot from just that education, and also from just doing a ton of traveling in Brazil and working in environments where people just had so much sense of justice. That's my path.
Great. Thank you so much once again, Dr. Pereda, for all of your insights. I want to quickly thank all of our co-sponsors, the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology, the Student National Medical Association, as well as the Department of Medical Education, Division of Community Outreach. I also want to thank all of our LMSA members and our e-board. Special shout out to Marcella and Tyler, who have been doing a lot of the planning for these events. And also thank you to all of you who have come out to this event and also to all of our events throughout Latinx Heritage Month. I hope you were able to take away some important insights that can inform you moving forward. And with that, I'll let y'all go. Thank y'all so much.